There's a rhythm to a Saturday. It's a slow, steady pulse, a downshift from the frantic arrhythmia of the week. For me, Saturday was a day of tangible things, of problems with nuts and bolts and solutions that came with the satisfying click of a well-seated socket wrench. It was a day of control. The garage was my sanctuary, a small kingdom where I was the undisputed sovereign. It smelled of motor oil, WD-40, and the faint, clean scent of concrete dust, a perfume of purpose. The low, tinny murmur of the classic rock station on the old radio was my court musician, the lyrics blending into a familiar, comforting hum. Every bolt I tightened, every filter I replaced, was a small, clean victory. A piece of the world, however small, bent to my will. Sarah was a Saturday visitor to my kingdom. She'd appear in the doorway, a ghost of a different world, her coffee mug in one hand, her presence trailing a light, floral scent that was the antithesis of my garage. It was a pleasant, fleeting invasion, a reminder of the softer, more complicated world that existed beyond the garage door. "Making progress, honey?" she'd ask, her voice a bright, cheerful thing. "Always," I'd reply, not looking up from the intricate guts of the old Mustang I was restoring. And then she'd be gone, leaving behind only the lingering ghost of her perfume. It wasn't unusual. Her Saturdays were her own, a whirlwind of brunch dates with friends, errands, the mysterious, unstructured activities that seemed to fill her time. She'd mention them in passing, meeting Claire for lunch, got to run to the mall, and I'd nod, my mind already on the precise torque specifications for a lug nut. We orbited each other on Saturdays, two planets in a stable, predictable system. But that day, the day the first hairline crack appeared in the foundation of my world, the orbit felt off. There was something different in the cadence of her appearances, a new frequency in her cheerful hum. Her perfume, the light, floral one, seemed heavier, more deliberate, as if it were a declaration rather than a mere accessory. Maybe it was nothing. I told myself it was nothing. Around noon, she appeared in the doorway again. And this time, I looked up, really looked up. The usual Saturday Sarah, the one in comfy, worn-in jeans and an oversized, paint-splattered college sweater, was gone. In her place was a stranger. This woman wore a beige dress, a simple, elegant sheath of fabric that hugged her figure in a way that was designed to be noticed. It was a dress for an occasion, not for a casual Saturday. Her shoes were not sneakers. They were delicate, strappy sandals with a low heel that clicked with a soft, confident rhythm on the concrete floor. Her hair, usually a messy, functional ponytail on a Saturday, was styled, falling in soft, deliberate waves around her shoulders. She looked polished. She looked expensive. She looked like she was going somewhere I was not invited. I paused, the heavy wrench in my hand suddenly feeling foreign. I gave her a slow, deliberate once-over. "You look nice," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I was an engineer by trade before I became a mechanic by passion. I deal in facts, in observable data. And the data before me was not adding up. Women dress up. It doesn't have to mean anything. This was the logical, reassuring narrative I tried to construct. Her smile, when it came, was quick, almost fleeting. It didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in to kiss me on the cheek, and the scent of her perfume was overwhelming, a cloud of engineered blossoms. Her eyes, I noticed, didn't meet mine. They glanced just over my shoulder, toward the door, toward her escape. "Don't wait up for me for dinner," she said, her voice light, breezy, a little too casual. "We might be out late." And then she was gone, the soft click-clack of her sandals fading as she walked through the house and out the front door. I stood there, wrench in hand, listening to the sound of her car starting, the engine a smooth, expensive purr that soon faded into the ambient hum of the neighborhood. The garage, my sanctuary, suddenly felt different. It was quieter, but also heavier. Her absence felt like a physical presence, a vacuum that had sucked the comfortable, easy air out of the room. I shook it off. I told myself it was all in my head. Asterisk people dress up. Maybe Claire booked a fancy restaurant. Women like that sort of thing. Asterisk I tried to believe the simple, plausible explanations. But a small, cold seed of something else, something that felt less like logic and more like a primal, gut-level instinct, had been planted. I went back to work, tightening the last bolt on the brake caliper, pouring the new fluid. But my focus was gone. My mind kept replaying the scene. The dress, the shoes, the averted eyes, the casual, dismissive way she had said, "Don't wait up." Looking back now, I can see it so clearly. That was the moment. The first, almost invisible fissure in the bedrock of my life. The kind of thing you only notice when the rain starts seeping through and you realize, far too late, that the foundation has been compromised for a very, very long time. At the time, I didn't see it for what it was. I didn't realize it was the beginning of the end. I just thought it was another Saturday. If only it had stayed that way. By Sunday morning, a rational man would have shaken it off. A late night out with a friend, a nice dress. These were not, in and of themselves, indictments. But the feeling that had taken root in my garage the day before had not dissipated overnight. It had metastasized. It wasn't a sharp, accusatory jealousy. I had never been a jealous man. It was something more insidious, a gnawing sense of inconsistency. It was the feeling an engineer gets when a crucial measurement is off by a millimeter, a tiny deviation that hints at a much larger, systemic flaw. Sarah was still asleep, a peaceful, untroubled island in the vast sea of our king-sized bed. I decided to tackle the laundry. It was a mindless, methodical task, a form of meditation. The rhythmic hum of the machine, the neat folding of warm fabric. It was another small corner of the world I could bring to order. I was sorting through the pile on the floor of the laundry room, my grease-stained t-shirts, her soft, pastel blouses, when my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. It was smooth, cool, heavy. Silk. I pulled it out from the tangled nest of clothes. I was holding a man's tie. It was black, impeccably made, with a subtle, woven pattern that caught the dim light of the laundry room. I frowned. It wasn't mine. My collection of ties consisted of 2 outdated, slightly too wide specimens reserved for weddings and funerals. I didn't own a tie like this. This was a tie that belonged to a different kind of man, a man who wore tailored suits and closed deals in high-rise boardrooms. I turned it over in my hands, a detective examining a clue. I looked for a brand, a label, initials, anything that might explain its presence in my home, in my wife's laundry. There was nothing. It was pristine, anonymous. It felt like an intruder, an artifact from a parallel universe that had somehow breached the walls of my own. My first instinct was to construct a logical, harmless explanation. A guest, months ago, at a party I'd forgotten. Sarah, who occasionally helped her friend Claire with event planning, had borrowed it for a display, and it had ended up in her bag by mistake. These were the plausible, comforting stories I clung to. Still, it didn't sit right. The feeling of inconsistency intensified. I hung the tie on the corner of the laundry room cabinet, a silent, black question mark, and walked away. It didn't feel like enough to confront her about. Not yet. I am not a man who jumps to conclusions. But every time I walked past that room, I could feel its presence. It was staring at me, a silent witness to a crime I hadn't yet defined. That evening, Sarah returned from whatever Sunday errands she had run. She seemed content, almost glowing, as if she had spent the day at a spa. She kissed me on the cheek, a brief, perfunctory gesture, and flopped onto the couch, her phone immediately in her hand. The tie was still nagging at me, a persistent, low-grade hum of anxiety. I decided to bring it up. Casually. "Hey," I said, my voice carefully light as I flipped through the channels on the TV. "Do you know where that tie came from?" "The one in the laundry." Her eyes flickered toward the laundry room door, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it. A hesitation. A minute tightening of her jaw. A flicker of something that looked like calculation. Then, it was gone, replaced by a bright, easy laugh. A laugh that was, perhaps, a little too easy. "Oh, that's James's," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "We were helping him get ready for his anniversary party last week. I must have just thrown it in my bag by mistake." The explanation was plausible. James was a friend of ours, a wealthy investment banker. The kind of man who would own such a tie. It checked out. And yet, something about her tone, her immediate, almost too quick response, felt wrong. It felt rehearsed. I nodded, letting it go. "For now. Makes sense," I said, my voice even. She turned back to her phone. The conversation, in her mind, concluded. But the image of that brief hesitation, that fleeting moment of calculation, stayed with me. It was like a door she had slammed shut just a second too late, giving me a glimpse of the dark, cluttered room behind it. That night, As I lay in bed beside her, her breathing deep and even, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The dress, the tie, the hesitation, the laugh that was just a little too light, the words that were just a little too polished. It wasn't enough to form an accusation, but it was more than enough to plant a seed of deep, corrosive doubt. It's strange, isn't it? How something so small, a simple strip of black silk, can hold so much weight. But it wasn't just the tie. It was the questions it raised, questions I hadn't even realized I needed to ask. Looking back, I wonder if that was the moment I started to pull on the single, loose thread that would eventually unravel the entire fabric of our lives. At the time, though, I told myself to let it go, to trust her, to trust us. But trust is a fragile thing. Once a crack appears, no matter how small, you can't unsee it. And cracks, if you ignore them, only ever get bigger. By the following weekend, I had engaged in a week-long, intensive campaign of self-delusion. I told myself to let the tie go. Sarah had given me an explanation, and to doubt it without further evidence was to indulge in a paranoid fantasy. I was overthinking, I told myself. I was stringing together unrelated data points, a dress, a tie, a late night, to create a narrative of betrayal that existed only in my own insecure mind. But no matter how rigorously I applied logic to the problem, the unease, the feeling of a fundamental inconsistency, remained. It was a low, persistent hum in the background of my thoughts. It didn't help that other, smaller anomalies began to surface. Her phone, which had once been a communal object left face up on the kitchen counter, was now a private fortress, always placed screen down, as if its glowing face held state secrets. Her social life, once a predictable rhythm of dinners and brunches, became more erratic. Last-minute plans with Claire became a frequent refrain. When I'd ask about her day, her answers were clipped, polished, and oddly generic, like she was reading from a press release. And then there were the gym trips. She had always been fit, but now her dedication to the gym had become almost fanatical. Extra sessions during the week, spontaneous workouts on weekends. When I, in an attempt to bridge the growing distance, offered to join her, she'd laughed and brushed me off. Oh no, honey, this is my me time. None of it, on its own, was a smoking gun, a tie, a phone, the gym. These were the mundane artifacts of a modern life. But together, they were forming a mosaic. The picture was still blurry, the colors indistinct, but the outline of something ugly and unmistakable was beginning to emerge. I am not a man who jumps to conclusions, but I am also not a man who ignores data, and the data was telling me something was profoundly wrong. I decided I needed more data. Real, undeniable, empirical data. If I was going to confront her, I couldn't do it with a handful of vague suspicions and a black silk tie. I needed proof. Cold, hard, irrefutable evidence. So, I began a quiet, methodical investigation. I started small, a simple test of her story. One evening, she told me she was heading out for dinner with Claire to a specific Italian restaurant they frequented. It sounded routine. About 45 minutes after she left, I called her. I kept my voice casual, manufacturing a plausible reason for the call. Hey Sarah, I said, my tone light. Sorry to bother you, but I can't find the contract for the kitchen renovation. Do you remember where you put it? There was a pause on the line, just a beat too long. A moment of calculation. Then, her voice, smooth and steady. Oh, it's in the blue folder in the drawer of the hallway table, honey. You must have missed it. Her answer was quick, confident, but I wasn't listening to the words. I was listening to the background. The low hum of conversation. The clink of silverware on ceramic. The faint strains of some generic, instrumental music. It sounded like a restaurant. Exactly where she said she'd be. Everything seemed to check out. But just as I was about to hang up, feeling a brief, foolish wave of relief, I heard it. A man's voice, close to the phone. Hey, everything okay? It wasn't loud. It wasn't overtly familiar, but it was there. A foreign data point in my carefully controlled experiment. Who was that? A waiter? Another diner? I didn't press. I thanked her, ended the call, and told myself I was imagining things. But the voice lingered. The next day, I escalated my surveillance. I had an old GPS tracker from a cross-country road trip, a small, discreet device no bigger than a matchbox. While she was in the shower, I retrieved it from a box of old electronics in the garage. My hands were steady, my movements precise. I slipped it into the trunk of her car, tucking it under the carpeted lining, out of sight. It linked to an app on my phone. I could now track her movements in real time. The act felt transgressive, a violation of a trust one wasn't even sure existed anymore. But I needed to know. That evening, she left for another dinner with Claire. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I opened the app. I watched the small, blinking that represented my wife move across the digital map of our town. At first, the data was reassuring. She drove directly to the Italian restaurant. The dot remained stationary for nearly 2 hours. But then, just as I was beginning to feel the familiar sting of my own paranoia, the dot began to move again. It wasn't heading home. It was taking a different route, heading toward a quiet, secluded residential area on the other side of town. An area with no restaurants, no shops, no landmarks. An area with no plausible reason for her to be. My pulse quickened. I watched the dot come to a stop on a street lined with large, expensive houses hidden behind high hedges. When she came home later that night, her mood was bright, cheerful. I tried to act casual, a husband making small talk. "How was dinner?" I asked, watching her face carefully. "Did you stop anywhere else afterward?" She smiled, a calm, easy expression. "Oh, Claire forgot her phone at the restaurant, so we had to circle back. Can you believe it? We drove around the neighborhood for 10 minutes looking for a place to turn around before we finally found it." Her explanation was a masterpiece. It was flawless. It accounted for the route, the stop, the timing. It was a perfect, interlocking web of lies, designed to anticipate my every question. And in that moment, I knew. I knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the concrete floor of my garage. She was hiding something. She was hiding someone. The little inconsistencies, the polished excuses, the subtle shifts in her behavior. They were not random data points. They were the carefully constructed components of a massive, elaborate deception. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. If I was wrong, I would detonate our marriage for nothing. But if I was right, I needed to be sure. I needed to see the full, ugly picture before I brought the whole house down. By this point, I felt like I was living a double life. On the surface, I was Mark, the steady, predictable husband, the man who fixed cars and paid the mortgage on time. I engaged in our familiar routines, made small talk about our days, and played the part of a man who was blissfully unaware. But beneath that placid surface, a different man was at work. A man who had become a cold, calculating investigator in his own home. The puzzle pieces were beginning to form a picture I didn't want to see, but I couldn't stop myself from assembling them. The GPS tracker was my map, but I needed to see the terrain. I needed more than just a blinking dot on a screen. So, one morning, while Sarah was in the shower, I took the next step. I installed a small, wide-angle camera in the dashboard of her car. It was a discreet little thing, no bigger than a thumbnail, tucked into the plastic lining near the rearview mirror. It linked to my phone, providing a live feed. If she was hiding something, I was determined to see it with my own eyes. That evening, she announced another dinner with Claire. I nodded, pretending to be engrossed in a magazine, while my heart hammered against my ribs. As soon as the garage door rumbled shut behind her, I opened the app. I watched her movements, the familiar blinking dot tracing its now predictable path. First, to the restaurant. The alibi. The dot remained stationary for just over an hour. Then, it began to move again. Not toward home. Toward him. My stomach churned as I watched the dot head toward the quiet, residential street. It came to a stop. I zoomed in on the map. It was a single house, large and modern, set back from the road behind a screen of manicured trees. I switched from the GPS feed to the camera. The view was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. I waited. A few minutes later, the passenger door opened. A man got in. He was tall, sharply dressed in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by the shadows. But I could see enough. He moved with a smug, easy confidence that made my blood boil. His name was Daniel. I knew this because Sarah said it. Her voice, though muffled, was clear. It was soft, almost shy, a tone I hadn't heard from her in years. His voice, when he replied, was a low, smooth baritone, carrying a casual familiarity that felt like a physical blow. Then it happened. She leaned toward him. He met her halfway. The kiss was brief, but it was devastating. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. I watched her pull back, her face illuminated for a moment by the light of a passing car. She was glowing, a warm, happy radiance that was meant for him, not for me. I stopped the feed. I sat in the darkness of my own living room, the phone heavy in my hand. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was a high-definition video of my wife's betrayal. There was no more doubt. No more paranoia. There was only the cold, hard, ugly truth. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. A confrontation now would be messy, emotional. It would lead to a torrent of denials, excuses, gaslighting. She would try to turn it back on me, to make me the villain for spying on her. No, I needed more. I needed something she couldn't possibly deny, something that would strip away every last one of her carefully constructed lies. The next day, I called in a favor from a friend, Ethan, who owned a private investigation firm. He handed me a tiny audio recorder, a state-of-the-art device that could fit in the palm of my hand. "Whatever you're looking for," he said, his expression grim. "This will give you clarity." That evening, when she was getting ready for another last-minute outing, I slipped the recorder into the side pocket of her favorite purse, the one she always took with her. It was a huge risk, but it was a calculated one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the garage, my sanctuary, which now felt more like a command center, and waited. When she finally came home, long after midnight, I retrieved the purse from the kitchen counter where she had dropped it. I took the recorder back to the garage, put on a pair of headphones, and pressed play. The last shred of my old life evaporated in a hiss of static and whispered words. The recorder had captured everything. Their laughter, the clinking of glasses, the murmured endearments, the way she called him Danny. But it was their conversation about me that shattered me. "I just feel so alive with you," she whispered at one point, her voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. "With Mark, it's just routine. Predictable. I don't even think he really notices me anymore." Her words were a dagger, twisting in my gut. Routine. The stability, the safety, the life I had worked so hard to build for us, she had reduced to a single, dismissive word. And worse, she blamed me. As if my predictability had somehow driven her into the arms of this man. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it made my blood boil. But the final blow, the one that extinguished the last flickering ember of love I had for her, came from him. "You could just leave him, you know," he said, his voice laced with a smug, condescending amusement. He'd never even see it coming. And then, her reply. A reply that would echo in my mind for months to come. "It's not that simple," she'd said with a sigh. "This is just easier. Easier star. Betrayal, deceit, and a web of intricate lies were easier than honesty. Easier than having the basic human decency to tell the man she had been married to for 12 years that she was unhappy." That's when something inside me snapped. The grief, the hurt, the confusion, it all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard, diamond-like resolve. I wasn't going to let her humiliate me for one more second. But I wasn't going to have a screaming match. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. No, I needed a plan. Something meticulous. Something she wouldn't see coming. The evidence was all there, a neat, damning pile of it. But for now, I would keep my cards close to my chest. I would wait. I would watch. And I would choose the time and the place for the final, devastating reveal. It was supposed to be a small gathering. A casual night with friends. Or so she claimed, her voice bright and breezy when she told me about it. I played along, nodding, offering to help with drinks, my face a carefully constructed mask of the same old, predictable Mark. Inside, I was a coiled spring of cold, calculated fury. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was not just a gathering of her friends. This was a performance. She was bringing him, Daniel, into my home. Our home. The audacity was breathtaking. But it was also a gift. She had no idea I was watching, no idea her entire shadow life had been exposed. She was walking, willingly and happily, into a trap of her own making. The day of the party, I went about the preparations with a chilling, dispassionate efficiency. I set up the bar on the back patio. I arranged chairs. I made small talk with Sarah about the caterer. All the while, I felt like a bomb, ticking silently toward detonation. Sarah, in contrast, was radiant. She floated through the house, humming to herself, her confidence palpable. She was the queen of her own secret kingdom, and tonight, She was inviting her court into the castle of the oblivious king. She had no clue what was coming. The guests began to arrive, a parade of smiling, chattering people, most of whom I barely knew. Claire, her supposed best friend and primary alibi, arrived first, greeting Sarah with a hug and a squeal of manufactured enthusiasm. Then, the others from her social circle. And then he walked in. Daniel. He strolled through my front door with the easy, proprietary air of a man who believed he was already the master of the house. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. He carried himself with a smug, unassailable confidence that made me want to physically remove him from my property. He glanced at me, offered a brief, dismissive, "Hey, man," and then his entire focus shifted to Sarah. She lit up. It was like a switch had been flipped, her wattage increasing tenfold in his presence. Her smile was wider, her laugh easier. They were a magnetic north and south, an invisible force pulling them together in the center of my living room. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to stay calm, to watch, to wait. The night unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. Sarah played the perfect hostess, flitting between guests, her charm on full display. But her orbit was never far from Daniel. I watched them from across the room, a ghost at my own party. The subtle, knowing glances. Her hand, lingering for a beat too long on his arm as she passed him a drink. It was nauseating. My home, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a stage for their sordid little drama, and their friends were the unwitting audience. As the night wore on and the wine flowed, Sarah's confidence swelled into a cruel, careless arrogance. She began to make little jabs at me, thinly veiled insults disguised as playful anecdotes. She told a story about my fumbling attempt to fix the dishwasher, her voice laced with a mocking affection, the group laughing along with her. Normally, I would have played along, the good-natured, self-deprecating husband. But tonight, every laugh felt like a shard of glass. At one point, Daniel chimed in. "Well, every handyman needs a good supervisor, right?" he said, his eyes sparkling with amusement as he looked at Sarah. The group roared. I caught Sarah's eye. She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated approval. In that moment, it wasn't just me she was mocking. It was us, the life we had built, the man I was. And then, it happened. The moment that pushed me over the edge. I was standing by the kitchen counter, pouring myself a club soda, trying to create a small pocket of neutral territory. Sarah came over, her face flushed with wine and excitement, Daniel trailing behind her like a loyal puppy. She was already laughing at something he had said. She caught me by the arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Oh, lighten up, Mark," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "It's just a joke." I didn't say anything. I couldn't trust myself to speak. The silence seemed to irk her. She turned on me, her tone suddenly sharp, accusatory. "See, this is what I'm talking about," she announced to the room at large. "He never knows how to take a joke. Always so serious." The group chuckled, a nervous, uncertain sound. And then Daniel's voice, smooth and condescending, cut through the air. "Come on, Sarah. Maybe he's just tired of playing house." I froze. The insult was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to hit its target with maximum impact. But before I could even process a response, Sarah did something so shocking, so utterly contemptuous, that it sucked the air from the room. She spat at me. It wasn't a big, dramatic spray. It was a small, deliberate, almost casual flick of her tongue, a fleck of spittle landing on the front of my shirt. It was an act of such profound, visceral disrespect that for a moment, time seemed to stop. The laughter died. The chatter evaporated. Every eye in the room was on us. Daniel, of course, broke the silence. He let out a loud, braying laugh, a sound of pure, triumphant cruelty. And that was it. The ticking bomb inside me finally detonated. My vision narrowed to a single point, his laughing, smug face. The weeks of suspicion, the pain of discovery, the slow burn of humiliation, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot flash of pure, unthinking rage. Before I was even aware of my own movement, my fist connected with his jaw. The sound was a sharp, satisfying crack. A tooth, white and shockingly alien, flew from his mouth and skittered across the kitchen floor. He staggered backward, his hand flying to his mouth, his face a mask of stunned, bloody disbelief. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice was low, steady, a growl that vibrated from the very core of my being. My eyes were not on him. They were locked on Sarah. And for the first time that night, for the first time in months, she looked scared. Not angry, not defiant. Scared. The guests stood frozen, a tableau of horrified shock. I pointed to the front door. The party's over. Leave. One by one, they began to shuffle out, their heads down, murmuring awkward, hasty apologies. Daniel was the last to go, clutching his jaw, a dark stain of blood spreading on the collar of his expensive shirt. Sarah remained, standing amidst the wreckage of her own making, the confident queen suddenly deposed, her kingdom in ruins. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect hostess, the charming wife, had been shattered. As the front door clicked shut behind the last guest, I turned to her. "You will humiliate me for the last time, Sarah," I said, my voice as cold and dead as the ashes of our marriage. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there alone, utterly and finally exposed. The morning after the party, the house was preternaturally quiet. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting has ceased, a heavy, oppressive stillness thick with the ghosts of the previous night's violence. I woke up in the guest room, the bed feeling like a stranger's, the sheets cold and unfamiliar. I couldn't bring myself to return to the bedroom I had shared with Sarah. That space, once a sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. I didn't hear her stirring. Perhaps she was still asleep, lost in a wine and guilt-induced stupor. Or perhaps she was awake, lying in our bed, too ashamed or too afraid to face me. Either way, her presence or absence upstairs was irrelevant. The anger from the night before, that white-hot, explosive rage, had burned itself out. In its place was not sadness or grief, but a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. She had spat on me. She had stood by her lover and laughed as he mocked me in my own home. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a declaration of war. The humiliation wasn't just an act. It was a symptom of a deeper, more profound contempt she held for me, for the life we had built. I had spent months being the quiet, observational scientist, gathering data, analyzing the evidence. Now, the experiment was over. It was time to act on the results. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee in my hand, and stared out the window at the gray, indifferent morning. How had I missed it? How had the steady, predictable man she married become the object of such scorn? The questions were no longer about her infidelity. They were about her cruelty. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. His name was Lucas Thorne, a man whose reputation for being a ruthless, calculating shark was well earned. I wasn't waiting for Sarah to make the next move. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about protecting my assets and my future from the woman who had just demonstrated she was capable of anything. I laid out the entire story for Lucas, from the first suspicious Saturday to the final, bloody confrontation. I left out no detail: the tie, the GPS tracker, the camera, the audio recording, and finally, the public humiliation with a dozen witnesses. He listened in a quiet, focused silence. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mark," Lucas said finally, his voice devoid of sympathy but filled with a chilling, professional excitement. "This isn't just a divorce case. This is a tactical strike. And you, my friend, are holding all the munitions." He wasn't wrong. The truth, in all its ugly, brutal detail, was on my side. Lucas assured me he would begin immediately. His first move, filing an emergency motion to freeze our joint accounts. "She won't see it coming," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "By the time she realizes what's happening, she won't be able to touch a dime of what's yours." The satisfaction I felt was brief and cold. This wasn't about revenge in the hot-blooded sense. This was about justice. It was about consequences. Sarah had spent months, perhaps years, operating in a world devoid of them. That was about to change. Later that day, she finally emerged from the bedroom. She looked like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed. I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering affection. Just a vast, empty distance. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling around a mug of coffee. "Mark," she began, her voice a raw whisper. I don't even know where to start." "Don't," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a slab of granite. I don't want to hear it. Not now. Not ever. She flinched, but she pressed on, a desperate, last-ditch effort. I messed up. I know I did. But please, we can fix this. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Fix this? You think this is something that can be fixed? You spat on me, Sarah? You laughed at me with him. In my house. And you want to fix it? My voice rose, the cold control cracking for a moment. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. 1,000 choices over months and months. You chose to lie. You chose to betray. You chose to humiliate me. And now, only now, when you're finally facing the consequences, you want forgiveness? No, you don't get to ask for that. She stared at me, stunned into silence. For the first time, she had no polished response, no clever excuse. And her silence was the most damning confession of all. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I continued, my voice calm again, the control returning. Your access to our joint accounts has been frozen. You won't be touching another cent of my money. I'm filing for divorce. And I have more than enough evidence, recordings, videos, witnesses, to ensure you walk away with absolutely nothing. Her face crumbled. The last of her composure shattered, and she began to sob, deep, racking sobs of pure, selfish despair. Mark, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. I stood up. We're done, Sarah? Pack your things. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. I turned and walked away, leaving her to drown in the wreckage she had created. That night, I slept in the guest room again. But this time, it felt different. The coldness of the bed didn't bother me. The silence of the house wasn't oppressive. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of control. Her betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had not destroyed me. And now, it was my turn to rebuild. The morning after Sarah's tearful, futile pleas, I began the systematic dismantling of our shared life. There was no room for sentimentality, no space for doubt. I had spent months in a fog of confusion and hurt. Now, I was operating with the cold, clear precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. Lucas Thorne, my lawyer, moved with a speed and efficiency that was both terrifying and deeply satisfying. By the end of the day, every joint account was frozen solid. Sarah, who had grown accustomed to a life of casual, consequence-free spending, was cut off. I had already begun the process of separating my personal and business finances, building a firewall around the assets I had worked my entire life to accumulate. During a meeting in his stark, minimalist office, Lucas leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Mark, you're going to walk out of this clean, he said. The house, the savings, her alimony claim, it's all a non-starter. In this state, adultery with demonstrable evidence, especially evidence of this quality, he gestured to the file containing my recordings and logs, gives you all the leverage. She won't have a leg to stand on. I nodded, the feeling of satisfaction a muted, grim thing. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking a just and equitable conclusion. Consequences. But Lucas wasn't done. There's one more thing, he said, tapping a pen against the table. We should make sure the evidence is entered into the public record as part of the filing. Once it's there, anyone, including her employer, their clients, her precious friends, can see the details. The suggestion hung in the air. This was a step beyond protecting my assets. This was an act of total war. This would not just end her marriage. It could end her career, her social life, her entire carefully constructed world. For a moment, a flicker of the old Mark, the man who avoided confrontation, hesitated. Was it too much? Then, I thought of her face, laughing. I thought of the spittle on my shirt. I thought of Daniel's smug, condescending voice on the recording. No, it wasn't too much. It was accountability. Within days, the papers were filed, and Sarah was served. I was home when the process server arrived. I watched through the window as he handed her the thick manila envelope. The look on her face as she tore it open and began to read was a slow-motion collapse of disbelief into pure, abject despair. She confronted me later that evening, waving the papers in her hand, her face a mask of fury and desperation. You're really doing this? She asked, her voice trembling. After everything we've been through? I met her gaze, my own expression a calm, unreadable slate. Yes, Sarah. Because of everything you've done, I am doing this. She tried to argue, to plead, to threaten, but her words were just the frantic, empty gestures of a checkmated queen. I walked away, leaving her to stew in the harsh, undeniable reality she had created. The fallout was not limited to our home. As Lucas had predicted, the details of the filing began to circulate. Her employer, a high-profile marketing firm with a strict code of conduct and a jealous regard for its public image, called her in for a meeting. I wasn't privy to the details, but the outcome was swift. Indefinite suspension pending an internal review. In the corporate world, that was a death sentence. Daniel did not escape unscathed. Lucas, with a particular relish I found both disturbing and useful, had ensured that a copy of the evidence found its way to the board of directors at his company. As a senior executive, his behavior was deemed a gross violation of company policy, a liability they could not afford. He was terminated, effective immediately, escorted out of the building by security like a common criminal. The smug, untouchable man was now jobless and disgraced. The whispers in our social circle became a roar. Friends who had once fawned over Sarah's charm now avoided her calls. Colleagues distanced themselves, not wanting to be tainted by her scandal. The carefully curated image she had projected for years was disintegrating in real time. The court hearing was a formality, the final, brutal blow. Lucas presented the evidence with the cool, dispassionate precision of a scientist presenting a thesis. The recordings, the logs, the witness statements from the party. It was an open and shut case. The judge's verdict was decisive. The house was mine. The joint assets were mine. Her alimony claim was summarily denied. She was ordered to cover all legal fees. By the time the gavel fell, she looked like a hollowed-out shell of the vibrant, confident woman she had once been. As we were leaving the courtroom, she approached me one last time, her face streaked with tears. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to end like this." I looked at her, at this stranger who wore my wife's face. The anger was gone. The bitterness was gone. There was only a vast, empty space where our life used to be. "It ended the moment you chose him over us, Sarah," I said, my voice not unkind, but firm, final. "Now you have to live with that choice." I turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving her standing alone on the cold courthouse steps. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my future. The storm had been brutal, destructive, but I had weathered it. And as I stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright, indifferent sunlight, I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that I was free. In the aftermath, Sarah's world didn't just crumble, it atomized. The confident, polished woman who had moved through life with an air of effortless entitlement was gone, replaced by a ghost haunted by the consequences of her own choices. The fallout was not a single, dramatic explosion, but a slow, relentless poison that seeped into every corner of her existence. Her suspension from work, as predicted, became a formal termination. The internal review at her firm was a brutal affair. The evidence I had provided, the recordings, the messages, the witness accounts of her public cruelty, was laid bare. For a company that prided itself on its pristine image, Sarah's actions were an unforgivable liability. She was let go, without severance, her professional reputation in tatters. The whispers among her former colleagues became an epitaph, a cautionary tale about a rising star who had spectacularly flamed out. Daniel fared no better. His termination was a public affair in the small, insular world of high finance. The story of the senior executive caught in a sordid affair, who had been fired after a confrontation with the wronged husband, became a piece of delicious, cautionary gossip. His professional network, once his greatest asset, evaporated overnight. He was radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with that kind of scandal. I heard, through the grapevine, that he had sold his large, modern house, the one my wife had frequented, and moved out of state, a disgraced man seeking anonymity. He had disappeared from her life as quickly and casually as he had entered it, unwilling to share in the consequences of their shared betrayal. But it was the social fallout that seemed to cut the deepest. The friends who had once formed her glittering court, who had laughed at her jokes at my expense, now treated her like a pariah. Invitations to the brunches, the charity events, The dinner parties that had been the very oxygen of her existence simply stopped coming. Claire, her supposed best friend, the woman whose name had been the shield for 100 lies, cut all ties, claiming she couldn't condone Sarah's messy behavior. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The same people who had been entertained by her drama now shunned her for it. She was left standing alone in the wreckage. I heard about her struggles in sporadic, secondhand reports. An acquaintance mentioned seeing her working a temporary job at a retail store during the holidays, looking disheveled and lost. Another told me she had been forced to sell her designer clothes and handbags online to make ends meet. The digital age is unforgiving. The court records, with their damning transcripts and evidence, were a permanent, searchable stain on her name. Nothing stays hidden forever. One cold, gray afternoon, months after the divorce was finalized, she showed up at the house. I was in the process of packing, preparing to sell the place and move on. I saw her through the front window, standing on the porch, clutching a small suitcase, her face pale and tear-streaked. For a moment, I considered not answering. But some vestigial piece of our shared history, some ghost of the man I used to be, compelled me to open the door. "Mark," she said, her voice a raw, broken thing. I don't know where to go. I don't have anything left." I looked at her, at the ruin of the woman I had once loved. The anger was long gone. The bitterness had faded. In their place was only a cold, profound sense of finality. "You made your choices, Sarah," I said, my voice not unkind, but unyielding. "Now you have to live with them." Her lip quivered. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She nodded, a small, defeated gesture. I shut the door, the click of the lock a definitive punctuation mark on a story I had never wanted to write. As I watched her walk away, a small, lonely figure dragging a suitcase down the street I used to call home, I felt no triumph. There is no joy in watching someone self-destruct, even someone who has hurt you as deeply as she had. But there was peace. A quiet, steady peace that came from knowing I had stood up for myself, that I had reclaimed my dignity, that I had survived. The days after her final, desperate visit were quiet, but they were not empty. The house, once a battlefield, became my workshop again. I packed boxes, repaired walls, and slowly, methodically, erased the last traces of our life together. Grief, I discovered, is not just for lost love. It is for lost illusions. The illusion of the woman I thought she was, of the life I thought we had. The community whispers faded. Sarah became a ghost, a cautionary tale. I, on the other hand, began to rebuild. I sold the house and bought a smaller place, a workshop with a loft apartment above it, a space that was entirely my own. I poured myself back into my work, into the tangible, honest world of engines and steel. I reconnected with old friends. I started to rediscover the man I was before the slow, quiet erosion had begun. One morning, as I stood in my new workshop, the smell of coffee and motor oil in the air, a sense of profound, unshakable calm washed over me. The storm was over. I had been broken, yes, but I had not been destroyed. I had rebuilt. And the foundation I was standing on now, a foundation of self-respect and hard-won peace, was unshakable. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was free. And that was more than enough.